The decline of an empire is rarely a sudden collapse. It is a slow, agonizing descent into a theater of mirrors where the actors have forgotten their lines and the stagehands are looting the props. I have sat in the rooms where the mechanics of power are supposedly maintained, the White House Situation Room, the deputies' meetings, the high level principals' briefings. I have seen the interagency process in action, a complex, grinding machine of coordination where policy is debated, vetted, and then meticulously implemented. It was a system built on the assumption of adult supervision, a belief that even in our most hubristic moments, there was a baseline of sanity and procedural discipline. But look at us now. Today, the United States is a nation where global policy is no longer formulated in the quiet halls of strategic planning. It is birthed in the erratic, spontaneous impulses of a single man's social media feed. We have entered an era where Truth Social is not just a platform, but a primary instrument of declarative policy, unprecedented, contradictory, and utterly dysfunctional. What we are witnessing is not just a change in leadership style, it is the total evaporation of the institutional guardrails that once defined the American hegemony. In the past, policy percolated up and down through a hierarchy of professionals who, for better or worse, understood the weight of their words. Now, we operate through spontaneous outbursts that send shockwaves through global markets and military commands alike, often before the Pentagon or the State Department even knows a decision has been made. This isn't just chaos, it's an institutional psychosis. We are watching the terms of our own retreat being dictated not by our strategists, but by our adversaries, specifically Iran. My president, my commander in chief, can spin as many narratives as he wants to soothe his ego about ending this perpetual state of war. But the reality is cold and indifferent. The war is ending on terms dictated by Tehran, and we are simply trying to find a politically viable way to surrender without calling it a defeat. The tragedy of the American establishment is its refusal to see the world as it actually exists. We are obsessed with the optics of power while the substance of that power has rotted away. We talk about red lines and maximum pressure while our actual capabilities are being tested and found wanting. The interagency process that once ensured a unified front has been replaced by a vacuum. And in that vacuum, policy is whatever the president says it is at 3 a.m. on a Friday. This total dysfunctionality is the hallmark of a declining power that can no longer coordinate its own limbs. We are a giant that is tripping over its own feet, lashing out at shadows while the world moves on to a multipolar reality that we are psychologically unprepared to accept. Consider the recent posturing regarding Iran. We are told that we are in a position of strength, that our military technology is a game changer, that will bring the Iranians to their knees. But history has a way of exposing the gap between propaganda and performance. In 1991, during the Gulf War, I was part of the infrastructure that oversaw the strategic air campaign against Iraq. I looked at the imagery, I analyzed the reports, and I was convinced we had annihilated their Scud missile production. I believed the spin misters because I was part of the machine. But then I did something unique. I went to Iraq as a weapons inspector. I walked through the ruins of the buildings I had helped target, and I realized a devastating truth. We had blown up a lot of concrete, but the factories were empty. The Iraqis had seen us coming, evacuated their assets, and left us to bomb ghosts. The Iranians have learned from that history, even if we haven't. They aren't just good at pouring concrete, as an Iraqi general once told me. They are masters of strategic patience and deception. While we are busy arguing with ourselves on social media, they are rebuilding, reconstructing, and hardening their infrastructure. They understand that the American campaign against them is a facade, a mix of overhyped capabilities and depleted arsenals. We dropped our most advanced penetrators, the GBU, 57S, and what was the result? Duds. 4 of them didn't even detonate. And now the Iranians are likely reverse engineering them in their labs. We are firing one $5 million missiles, which actually cost us $41 million apiece, if you're being honest about the production scale, at targets that have been empty for weeks. It is the height of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting the Iranians to eventually crumble just because we say they should. This decay is not limited to our military hardware. It has infected our very ability to negotiate in good faith. We treat diplomacy like a PR exercise designed to provide the president with a politically viable off ramp rather than a serious attempt to resolve underlying conflicts. Look at the history of the JCPOA and the subsequent negotiations. The Iranians show up with senior teams, technical data, and a 1-0 point plan, ready to make decisions on the spot. Our teams show up in receive mode with no plan of their own, constantly pausing to call home for instructions or to check in with Netanyahu. We are the ones who are unprepared. We are the ones who are dysfunctional. Our system, which allows a president to rescind an executive agreement at will because he couldn't get it through a fractured Congress, is seen by the rest of the world as fundamentally unreliable. Why would anyone sign a treaty with a nation that changes its mind every 4 years based on a mood swing or a social media post? We are entering a very hard summer, a silly season, where the distractions of domestic politics will collide with the harsh realities of a global economy. As the price of gas and food climbs, the American public will care very little about 165 dead Iranian schoolchildren or the strategic nuances of the Persian Gulf. They will care about their bank accounts, and in that desperation, the administration will look for any exit, any grand bargain that allows them to claim victory while the house is burning down. We are watching the end of an era where the myths we tell ourselves about our own exceptionalism are finally being dismantled by the very people we claim to lead. The question is not whether the empire will fall, but how much of the world it will try to take down with it as it goes. The technological hubris of the American military industrial complex is perhaps most visible in the cult of the game changer. We are constantly told that a new weapon system will shift the tectonic plates of power, restoring our dominance with the push of a button. Lately, the savior is the Dark Eagle, our foray into the world of hypersonic weapons. The media, acting as a chorus for the Pentagon's spin doctors, hails it as the ultimate deterrent. They claim it changes everything because it can strike targets from 1,750 miles away with precision, putting Iranian missile batteries at risk even after they've retreated deep into their own territory. It's a compelling narrative for a public raised on the myth of technological invincibility. But as someone who has lived in the world of operational reality, I find the cheering to be profoundly hollow. Let us look at the Dark Eagle not as a marketing brochure, but as a weapon of war. First, it has never been fully operationally tested. We are told it has completed tests, but the Pentagon itself remains silent on the actual lethality of the warhead. They don't know if it can truly kill the hard targets it is designed to penetrate, primarily because they are terrified to test it against realistic defenses. But even if we assume for a moment that the physics work and the weapon is as lethal as advertised, we must confront the crushing reality of logistics. How many of these game changers do we actually possess? The answer is 8. We have 8 missiles. In a theater where we habitually fire hundreds of tomahawks and joint standoff munitions in a single campaign, an inventory of 8 is not a military strategy, it's a vanity project. And then there is the cost, the fiscal rot that defines our procurement system. The Pentagon likes to cite a projected cost of $15 million per unit, a figure based on a fantasy of mass production that does not exist. The reality is that these 8 missiles cost $41 million each. We are spending a king's ransom on an unproven technology that we cannot even replace. Our current production capacity for the Dark Eagle is exactly 1 missile per month. Imagine the scene in Tehran. The Americans fire their 8 missiles, and the Iranians simply check their watches, knowing they have at least 30 days of peace before another one can even roll off the assembly line. It is a pathetic display of a superpower that has forgotten how to actually build the tools of war it so loudly threatens to use. This obsession with overhyped, overpriced capability is the defining characteristic of the modern American campaign against Iran. We are a nation that has spent 39 days bombarding targets, only to realize we haven't destroyed anything of strategic value. We blow up empty buildings and call it a victory. The high dud rate of our precision guided munitions is a secret the establishment is desperate to keep. During the Gulf War, the failure rate of Tomahawk missiles was so high it remains classified to this day. Why? Because if the American public knew that their multi-billion-dollar smart arsenal was frequently failing to detonate, the illusion of hegemony would vanish overnight. In 2017, when we fired 63 missiles at targets in Syria, 23 of them failed to work as intended. That's more than a third of our strike force failing in a single operation. We are firing missiles that don't work against targets that don't exist, all while maintaining the arrogant belief that the rest of the world is too stupid to notice. The Iranians are not scared. Why would they be? They see the same satellite imagery we do. They see the craters in the sand and the empty warehouses we've turned into rubble. They are in reconstruction mode, pouring concrete and restoring capacity, while we are still trying to figure out why our $1 million game changer is collecting dust in a silo. We are an insane nation, repeating the same failures of 1991 and 2017, yet expecting the Iranians to raise a white flag simply because we've exhausted our adjectives for how powerful we think we are. This disconnect from reality is not merely a military failing, it is a systemic corruption that goes all the way to the top. While the Pentagon lies about missile costs and lethality, the political class is finding ways to monetize the chaos. Look at the timing of the president's social media posts and the subsequent movements in the stock market. We see massive short positions being placed minutes before a declarative policy statement is made on truth social statements that everyone knows will send the markets into a tailspin. We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in profit being made on insider knowledge of a social media feed. This is not just a casino, as some would like to call it. It is blatant criminal activity being conducted under the guise of national security policy. Martha Stewart went to prison for far less. Yet here we have a system where policy by social media becomes a tool for massive wealth redistribution to an inner circle of supporters. We have a president who has, for all intents and purposes, sold our national security to the highest bidder or the most convenient short seller. People are dying and strategic positions are being lost so that millionaire buddies can recoup their losses from bad business decisions. This is the ultimate stage of imperial decay, when the wars are no longer fought for even the pretense of national interest, but as high-stakes market manipulations for a narrow elite. The most galling part is the realization that no one will be held accountable. Congress, which has spent decades perfecting its own brand of insider trading, has no interest in opening a door that might lead to their own bank accounts. They have watched their $174,000 salaries transform into $3-5 million net worths through the same connectivity they now pretend to investigate. The United States has become the most sophisticated corrupt state in the world, where the theft is codified into law and the propaganda is delivered via a 2-4 hour news cycle designed to keep the public distracted by ghosts while the treasury is being looted. We are a nation operating on debt, lies, and missiles that don't explode, a dangerous combination for any empire facing a world that has finally decided to stop playing along. The machinery of the American empire does not just consist of failing missiles and corrupt stock trades. Its most vital component is the manufacturing of consent through a corporate media apparatus that has long since abandoned any pretense of truth-telling. We see figures like General Jack Keane appearing on cable news, draped in the unearned authority of their former rank, spinning a narrative that is either born of profound ignorance or calculated malice. I lean toward the latter. These experts are not there to inform the public. They are there to provide a politically acceptable landing pad for a president who is currently jumping off a building of his own construction. They tell us that the Iranians are the ones dragging their feet, that they are the ones who are dishonest and unprepared. But the reality on the ground, the reality I've seen in the cold light of historical fact, is the exact opposite. I recall the recent diplomatic theater in Islamabad. The Iranians arrived with a delegation of senior officials and technical experts who were so well prepared they never once had to pause the proceedings to call home for instructions. They brought a detailed 10-point plan, backed by data and the authority to make decisions in real time. Contrast that with the American side, represented by the likes of Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner. They showed up in what I call receive mode. They didn't have a plan, they had a question. What do you got? It was the Americans who were constantly on the phone, calling back to the White House and receiving frantic instructions from the likes of Netanyahu. It is a staggering irony that the nation that prides itself on being the leader of the free world was the one that lacked the institutional discipline to even conduct a serious negotiation. We were not there to solve the underlying realities of the war. We were there to find a way for the president to save face. This brings us to one of the most persistent lies in the American consciousness: the nature of the Iranian state itself. Our media paints Iran as a monolithic dictatorship of the Ayatollahs, a medieval theocracy where policy is dictated by divine whim. But if you actually look at how their system functions, you find a constitutional republic that often operates with more legislative integrity than our own fractured Congress. Iran has a well defined executive, a parliamentary branch with genuine teeth, and a process of coordination that would be envied in Washington if we were still capable of feeling shame. When the JCPOA was being negotiated, the Iranian parliament didn't just rubber stamp it. They threatened to tear their foreign minister, Zarif, apart for what they saw as a betrayal of national sovereignty. He had to sit before them, explain every clause, and earn their vote. It was a rigorous, transparent process. Now, compare that to the American side. The reason Donald Trump was able to pull out of the JCPOA with the stroke of a pen was not because of some inherent flaw in the deal itself, but because of the deep seated dysfunction of the American system. President Obama could not turn that executive order into a treaty because he lacked the support of the Senate. We operated through executive whim rather than binding national commitment. This made us a fundamentally unreliable partner, a nation whose word is only as good as the next election cycle. We are the ones with the dysfunctional, unpredictable system, yet we have the audacity to lecture the world on stability. The Iranians, for all their faults, have a system that works, and they are using that stability to outmaneuver us at every turn. Mainstream media exists to promulgate the lies of the administration, to create a fiction where we are still the masters of the chessboard. They will never tell you that we are being dictated to by Tehran. They will never admit that our maximum pressure has resulted in a total loss of leverage. Instead, they give a platform to liars like Keane to spin a tale of Iranian non-compliance, creating a smokescreen for our own strategic bankruptcy. This is the beauty of independent analysis. We can look past the teleprompter and see the gears grinding to a halt. We are watching a negotiation designed not to bring peace, but to provide an off-ramp for a president who has realized his military options are non-existent. The Iranians know exactly where they stand. They have watched us bombard empty buildings for over a month, and they have realized that the American tiger is made of paper. They are rebuilding their bridges, pouring new concrete, and waiting for the moment when our economic fragility forces us to make the concessions we currently pretend are beneath us. They have no intention of surrendering their control over the Strait of Hormuz or the financial gains that come with it. They are demanding a white flag from the United States. And while the White House tries to mask this reality with aggressive tweets and stock market manipulations, the global balance of power is shifting. We are no longer the ones setting the terms. We are a nation in retreat, desperately trying to convince ourselves that we are still in command, even as we beg for an exit from a conflict we never should have started. This disconnect between the televised narrative and the geopolitical reality is where the danger lies. When a nation's leadership begins to believe its own propaganda, it loses the ability to respond to genuine threats. We are walking into a summer of immense economic and political volatility, led by people who think they can manage global crises through social media posts. We are watching the end of the American century, not with a bang, but with a series of frantic phone calls and unexploded missiles. The world is moving on to a multipolar order, and we are left shouting at a screen, wondering why the rest of the planet has stopped listening to our lies. The spectacle of American diplomacy has always been a performance for a domestic audience. But we have reached a point where the rest of the world is no longer interested in the play. While Washington remains trapped in its own echo chamber of social media posts and partisan bickering, the real shifts in the global order are happening in the hallways of Moscow and Beijing. I have watched the recent movements of the Iranian foreign minister with the cynical eye of a man who knows that when the American empire falters, the vacuum is filled with terrifying efficiency. He didn't come to Washington to beg for terms. He went to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. He went to Beijing to coordinate with Xi Jinping. These are the architects of the new multipolar world, and they are currently engaged in a masterclass of diplomatic maneuvers designed to manage the decline of the United States. Shortly after the Iranian consultations in Moscow, Vladimir Putin picked up the phone and initiated a 90-minute conversation with Donald Trump. For a man who prides himself on being the ultimate dealmaker, Trump was on the receiving end of a very different kind of reality check. Putin did not call to exchange pleasantries. He called to put the American president on notice. The message was clear. If the United States or its regional proxies resume kinetic action against Iran, the retaliation will not be localized. It will be an economic and strategic catastrophe that will shatter the global economy and bring permanent damage to the United States itself. Putin understands that Trump is terrified of a domestic economic collapse leading into the midterms. By framing the Iranian conflict as a fuse for a global depression, the Russians have effectively neutralized the American military option. Trump isn't looking for an off-ramp because he's a peacemaker. He's looking for one because he has been backed into a corner by a superior strategist. This is the grand bargain currently being hammered out in the shadows. We are witnessing a complex synchronization of crises where the fate of Iran is being tied to the ongoing slaughter in Ukraine. Russia is preparing for a dramatic escalation, putting the citizens and diplomatic staff of Kyiv on notice to evacuate. They have warned that any drone attacks on the May 9th Victory Day celebrations will result in the total destruction of the Ukrainian capital. They are eyeing the Baltic states, which they view as corridors for NATO-backed drone strikes. And looming over all of this is the street, Petersburg International Economic Forum, an event that has eclipsed Davos in its significance for the global south and the emerging multipolar order. If that forum is targeted, it will be treated as a declaration of war. Russia is prepared to break the deadlock in Europe through sheer force, and they are offering Trump a way to take credit for ending both conflicts simultaneously. The cynicism of this arrangement is breathtaking. The Russians and Chinese are willing to help Trump manufacture a narrative of victory to help him put lipstick on a pig so long as the underlying realities favor their interests. They will allow him to claim that he secured concessions, such as moving Iranian enriched uranium to Russia, even though the Iranians have already achieved their strategic goals. They will rebrand the Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz as a joint Iranian-Omani authority to make it palatable for the American public. It is a face-saving exercise for a superpower that can no longer afford to fight. Trump needs a political win for the November midterms, and the leaders of the multipolar world are more than happy to let him spin a data set that keeps him domestically viable while they dismantle the last vestiges of U.S. hegemony in the Middle East. This is the reality of the sovereignty of the global South that the American establishment refuses to acknowledge. We are no longer the indispensable nation. We are the erratic variable that needs to be managed. China's role in this is equally pivotal. The meeting between the Iranian leadership and Xi Jinping is a prelude to a summit where the Chinese will likely apply their own diplomatic magic to ensure the American retreat is orderly. They aren't doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They are doing it because a stable, Iranian-led regional order serves their Belt and Road interests far better than the chaotic, unpredictable interventions of a fading Washington. They see a United States that is more interested in insider trading and social media theater than in maintaining a coherent global strategy. While our leaders are busy arguing over Truth Social posts, the Iranians, Russians, and Chinese are drawing new lines on the map. They are creating a world where American sanctions are irrelevant and American military threats are laughed at in private. The insanity of repeating the same failed campaigns against Iran has finally caught up with us. We are an exhausted nation with a depleted arsenal and a leadership class that is more focused on the price of gas at the pump than the collapse of our strategic credibility. The upcoming summer will be one of the most difficult in American history, not just because of the economic hardship, but because the illusion of our dominance will be stripped away by the very peace deals Trump is so desperate to sign. We are watching a strategic surrender being rebranded as a diplomatic triumph. The Iranians are getting virtually everything they want: security, regional dominance, and the expulsion of American influence, while we are left with a handful of empty buildings and a stack of unexploded missiles. The world is watching as the peace we are negotiating is actually the sound of the door closing on the American century. We are being played by masters of the game who understand that the most effective way to defeat an empire is to give its leader a way to claim victory while he loses the war. This is the grand sweep of history, and it is moving in a direction that no amount of spin can change. We have traded our strategic soul for a politically viable landing pad, and the price of that trade will be felt for generations. The ultimate hubris of a dying empire is the belief that its internal delusions can somehow stop the gears of global reality. As we approach the summer of 2026, the American establishment is trapped in a silly season of its own making. We are obsessed with the optics of a managed exit from a war we have already lost, while the American people are being hit by an economic bombardment far more effective than anything we've dropped on Iran. It's the economy, stupid. That was the mantra that defined the 1990s, and it remains the ghost that haunts the halls of the White House today. While the president frantically posts on Truth Social to manipulate stock shorts, the average American driver is watching the price at the pump climb past $4 a gallon. This isn't just a transportation blip, it's the sound of the American household's post tax income evaporating. A $70 monthly increase in fuel costs might not move the needle for the millionaires in the president's inner circle, but for the median household, it is a declaration of war. We are a nation that has sat back and allowed the destruction of Gaza, watching a genocide unfold with a clinical indifference that would make a Roman emperor blush. We are told that the death of 165 Iranian school children in our recent bombardments is a necessary cost of regional stability. But do you think that moves the political needle in the United States? The answer is a cold, hard no. The American public doesn't vote on the morality of foreign slaughters. They vote on the price of milk and the cost of filling their tank before the Monday morning commute. Trump knows this. He knows that his Project Freedom and the naval blockades in the Strait of Hormuz are not just military operations, they are anchors dragging down his chances in the November midterms. This is why he is so desperate for an off-ramp, and why he is willing to accept lipstick on a pig from the very adversaries he claims to have mastered. The real mediation is not happening in Washington or Islamabad. It is happening in the corridors of power that we have spent decades trying to isolate. The Iranian foreign minister's travels to Moscow and Beijing were not a sign of desperation, but a victory lap. They are coordinating the terms of our retreat. While we talk about the Dark Eagle and our unproven hypersonic capabilities, the Russians are preparing to break the deadlock in Europe by force, and the Chinese are preparing for the street. Petersburg International Economic Forum, an event that will celebrate the birth of a multipolar order where the dollar is no longer the king of the mountain. Russia has put the West on notice. Any further mischief during their May 9th Victory Day celebrations will result in the total destruction of the Ukrainian state infrastructure. And the United States, we will let it happen. We will let it happen because we need the Russians and the Chinese to help us manufacture a narrative of peace so we can avoid a total economic meltdown before the polls open. The grand bargain being whispered about is a testament to our decline. We will allow the Iranians to keep their 60% enriched uranium on their shores, or perhaps move a fraction to Russia as a concession, while they maintain permanent de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz. We will rebrand the Iranian Strait Authority as an Iranian Omani Authority to give the American media something palatable to report. but the reality remains unchanged. We have surrendered the world's most vital energy artery to the very power we sought to destroy. The Iranians are not surrendering. They are reclaiming their sovereignty as a cornerstone of the global South. They have proven that they are better at pouring concrete than we are at blowing it up. They have shown that a nation with strategic patience can outlast a superpower with an attention span measured in social media posts. As I reflect on the grand sweep of history, I see the tragic irony of our position. We are a nation that spent trillions of dollars on an arsenal that doesn't work, led by a political class that values insider trading over national security, and served by a media that functions as a PR firm for a collapsing executive. We have reached the point where our enemies are the ones helping us find an off ramp because they realize that an unstable, collapsing America is more dangerous to the global economy than a managed, retreating one. They are managing our decline with the precision of a surgeon, allowing us to keep our pride in exchange for our power. The choice facing us now is between a graceful acceptance of a multipolar world and a catastrophic lashing out that will leave us in the ruins of our own making. We can continue to believe the lies of the spin misters and the game changers, or we can look at the reality of the pump, the reality of the empty factories in Iraq, and the reality of the duds in Iran. The era of the single hegemon is over. The American century has been closed by the very people who claim to be its most ardent defenders. We are now just another player on a crowded stage, shouting our lines into a void that has long since stopped caring about what we have to say. The mechanisms of power have shifted. Sovereignty is no longer something granted by Washington, it is something seized by the resilient. As the summer of 2026 heats up, the American people will have to decide if they are willing to continue paying the price for an empire that exists only in the mind of an insane man and the bank accounts of his supporters. The world has moved on. The concrete is being poured, the bridges are being rebuilt, and the new world order is being signed in languages we have forgotten how to speak. It is time to wake up from the dream of exceptionalism and face the cold, cynical reality of our own obsolescence. You have been told that we are the masters of the world, but your empty wallet and the rising prices tell a different story. If the missiles don't work and the treaties are just executive whims, what exactly is left of the American power you were promised? The theater is ending, the actors are taking their bows, and the lights are going out on the imperial stage. It is time for a new narrative, one that doesn't rely on ghosts and duds to maintain its authority. Keep your eyes on the price of gas and the movements in Moscow, for that is where the real history is being written. Don't be the last one left in the theater after the play has already moved to another city. Do you truly believe a nation can maintain its global status through social media posts while its military hardware fails and its economy bleeds? At what point does the cost of maintaining the illusion of power become so high that the American public finally demands a return to reality?